So welcome back guys to another Casual Sunday Lore. I'm Smotown, and if you're unfamiliar with this series, essentially it's just a series where I do some unscripted lore in a more casual way over some gameplay. Now, I had recorded this live with this footage that you're seeing, however Audacity has crashed and I've lost all the audio, frustratingly. So I'm going to just do a recording over the top of the gameplay that I recorded earlier. It'll still be unscripted, so hopefully it'll feel the same, but apologies for that. So from last week, you can see my character has grown a little bit, level 20, including a level for Mule of Londor. I farmed for the Lothric Knight armour, and apart from that, not too many changes, no particular build in mind still. And today I wanted to talk to you about the Undead Settlement in general, and what we can kind of see what's happening here and what has happened here in relation to the greater picture. So we can see that this is more or less a slum that has gathered at being built at the bottom of the wall of the Kingdom of Lothric, as so many slums were kind of built against medieval towns. And it's a desperate place. You can see bodies everywhere, and it's a very poor place. So desperation has certainly gripped this place. And we have this scene here with the burning tree and the evangelist here, and the evangelists are essentially missionaries from the Cathedral of the Deep, evangelists coming from generally the Christian faith in the real world, where their title is meant to represent a person or a preacher who comes to different places to spread their faith. And you can see here that I was talking at the time, and so my play and fighting skills are not as good as when I'm playing without commentary, so apologies for that. So the Undead Settlement is quite a desperate place, and the citizens are certainly suffering the effects of poverty, and so it's easy to see why a religion that espouses the ideals, or what ideals there can be, the Cathedral of the Deep does, that could take a hold of this village quite strongly. So I'm going to read the item description of the evangelist. And the item description says, "Robe of an evangelist sent from the Cathedral of the Deep. These teachers, all women, came to enlighten inhabitants of the Undead Settlement and sent carriers on the path of sacrifice." Now, the word enlightenment is used very interestingly here, and of course, they would claim that this is enlightenment, this religion that they're spreading, when in fact you could read it as being quite a sarcastic enlighten, because what in fact the evangelists are doing here is they are using faith as a mask to please their master, the path of sacrifice being interpreted as something, religious, when in fact it is just a way of Aldrich getting his next snack. And we see here that I'm going to try and clear the village as best I can and move towards getting the Mound makers, which I'll talk about as well in a minute as well. But the evangelists were sent here to convert these people to their faith, but it's not a genuine faith in a lot of ways. The ideals that are set up in this village, and you can see from the workers' attire that the workers here used to dissect and deal with bodies, and in a way you can see that this is suggestive of the fact that this whole village is set up to create a sort of cat food in a lot of ways for Aldrich the Devourer, who needs his hunger satiated because he has a hunger for men. And so this religion, sent by the evangelists, controlled by the evangelists, and enforced by the evangelists in this village, is essentially just a way for Aldrich to get his next meal. So Hawkwood would even talk a little bit further about this, and he would say, "At the foot of Lothric Castle, an old path still runs below the tower in the Undead Settlement. It was used to transport sacrifices to the Cathedral of the Deep." So this word sacrifice gives us a little bit more of an inkling as to what the point of this path of sacrifice was. It wasn't just the person walking along it sacrificing, which they do because they carry these big wooden heavy poles on their backs, but they are a sacrifice. They see it as a religious duty to send sacrifices from this village. And given how desperate this village is, you can't really blame them for buying into this religion. They've got nothing else to hold on for. And now, as I approach the kind of Mound Makers kind of Covenant Shrine, this is another kind of strange of madness that has taken hold in this village, this Moundmaker's Covenant is essentially about creating a kind of connection to yourself through your victims, aside from the gods, and it's a very fanatical belief. I absolutely love the Moundmaker's Covenant, though. They're one of my favourites. But that being said, it is another sign of the desperation of this village. Nothing like the Moundmakers could exist in a sane society where desperation didn't exist. So it just emphasises that desperation that is present. And I'm now approaching Hodrick here to get his chat as well. And he comments on the fact that, again, we don't fit in here because we aren't sane. And it's this insanity that is passing through the village that is kind of the main characteristic of this whole settlement. The Undead Settlement is driven to extremes, whether it be the Moundmakers or whether it be Aldrich's religion, which a lot of them probably see as not being insane because they are so desperate. It gives them strength to hold on to, when in fact it's just people taking advantage of their desperation. Aldrich in particular. These evangelists are using their teachings to take advantage of these villagers, so that they willingly prepare their own deaths, their own sacrifices from their village. And the same with this Moundmakers. This religion has given rise here because of the desperation. All the kind of belief systems here show that there is this desperation that's inherent within the village. And I'm going to kind of bone out of here now. But that being said, there is some beliefs in this village that are good, and I'll touch on that later. But going back to what Hawkwood said, he says we should see where it leads. And of course this ultimately leads to Aldrich, the cleric who devours humans. And this is essentially just a food train for him that has been masqueraded as a kind of religion. And we could see the evangelist in that square with the burning tree, that she seems to be leading some kind of sermon. And in fact, you see the villagers protecting these evangelists in many occasions, that they'll fight to defend them in a lot of ways because they buy into this religion and they will protect these people because they see them as sort of religious leaders. Now, that being said, this village is afflicted by other things, not just their desperation and this religion, but also by curses. There's the Cursed Greatwood, which is the boss. And this ancient tree is found in the centre of a kind of church-like building within the Undead Settlement. And its soul kind of can give us a kind of understanding of what this tree was and why it was worshipped by the villagers. So its soul description reads as follows. Ever since its establishment, all manner of curses have managed to seep into the Undead Settlement. The worst of them were sealed inside a spirit tree, but eventually the curses took their toll. So again, this village, being specifically below Lothric, is downwards, but it's more than geographical. The metaphysics in the world of Dark Souls works in very different ways, of course, than it works in the real world. I mean, I obviously don't need to explain that, but I think that not only is it below, so things kind of come here that have kind of reached the end of their tether, but I believe that curses are actually drawn here, and this is coming from something that Ludlith says. He tells us that this place is a crossing place for things cursed. As with everything in Dark Souls, physics works in different ways, and cursed things are drawn into this undead village. The spirit tree protected the village by consuming these curses, and these curses would include the spear of Earl Arstor, the Earl of Karim. Now, if you don't know who Earl Arstor is, he was a character mentioned in Dark Souls 1, and he was the Earl of Karim, the ruler of Karim, and he wasn't a great guy, in all honesty. He is the kind of driving force, or the originator of the item that we know as the Purging Stones. In Dark Souls 1, I know they're used for hollowing now, but in Dark Souls 1 they were used to remove a condition called Curse, and cursing would half your life and make it a lot harder for you, and it was kind of a traditional curse. And these Purging Stones would cure it. Now, on the face of it, that's great, But these purging stones, we're about to watch me get pitchforked to death here. It's funny, I'm not even talking and playing at the same time, but you can see I was obviously struggling to at the time as well. That's good times. Anyway, yeah, Earl Arstor, he's the creator of the Purging Stone, and he researched very dark items, and the main one's of course the Purging Stone. And the Purging Stone isn't something that actually really cures a curse. The Purging Stone is essentially a undead or another human who's been embedded into this stone in some form or another. So when you use the Purging Stone, you're purging the curse of yourself, of course, but you're actually just passing it on to another human. You're passing it on to the human who exists solely in this stone. And of course, that's not exactly great. It's not exactly a great life for the poor person in the stone. So Earl Arstor's not a great person, and the spear tells us he was also known as Earl Arstor the Impaler. So obviously playing off Count Vlad the Impaler from real life. The Impaler is obviously not a great name. It shows that he was obviously a very cruel man. Impaler implies that he would impale people on spikes on the end of his spear. So alongside experimenting people for these curse weaponry and other items like the Purging Stone, he was a very cruel man. And so it's no surprise, to me especially, that this item of his is cursed and ends up in the village, probably bringing some kind of badness with it. Now, another malformed item that has a curse on it that makes its way here is the weapon known as the Hollow Slayer Sword. And this was in Dark Souls 2 a weapon wielded by a Knight of Mirror. And at that point there was a little bit of darkness attached to hollowing to that character. However, that being said, it seems by Dark Souls 3 this item has taken on quite a dark edge, in that it is a weapon that preys on the fears of hollows, and therefore of course is a cursed item as well, so it's no surprise that that makes its way here. Indeed, there's another item that we get from the Cursed Greatwood, and that is the Transposing Kiln, which is an item that Ludlith tells us to find. However, he tells us that it was seen as a forbidden, cursed art in his homeland. And so again, despite the fact this being a very useful item, for whatever reason, using soul, well, it's not for whatever reason, it's quite obvious, twisting people's souls into weaponry is not a great thing. And it's so easy to understand why this item, a cursed item that we in fact use, made its way into the village as well. And just talking to our pyromancer friend here, mentions that he's an old crow, and as one of my viewers pointed out, there's a lot of kind of correlations with crow to this character, so I will probably look into that in the future, but yeah, not in this video, but I will talk about that later. Anyway, the Greatwood is what's known as a spirit tree, and this isn't the first time that spirit trees are mentioned actually. There's various other weapons, protective weapons in the game that mention spirit trees. So spirit trees are these sentient trees who have a soul, who are concerned with the protection of people. And so it's no surprise that this village worshipped it, and the tree chose to defend the village by doing the only thing it knows how, and that was to take in these curses itself. And by taking in these curses itself, it has corrupted itself. These cursed items have corrupted its usually benevolent and good spirit, protective spirit, and warped it into something darker. It's a cursed tree now, because these very cursed items, the amount of it that it has consumed, have made it a cursed tree itself, and its soul is tainted, its spirit is tainted. So this is like what happens to good things, good spirits, when they become cursed. And this is essentially the state of the village that we find it in. Its protector, the spirit tree, overwhelmed by the curse, it made a big sacrifice, and I have no doubt that it helped for a good time. But now we can see, like this evangelist here, the likes of Aldrich have swept in to this village, and it's now unprotected by the spirit tree, weakened by its poverty, by the curses that it's had to put up with. And instead of seeing the evangelists for what they are, and that is an enemy of the people of this village, they in fact see them as their saviour. So you can see here this villager defending this evangelist that I'm trying to fight here, because they see them as their saviours, but in fact they are their enemies that are taking advantage of these poor villagers without their protector anymore, without their spirit tree. Yeah, my usual skill in fighting evangelists. And yeah, this is how I see the Undead Settlement. It's a poor place that's had a lot of issues. It was taken over by these curses. It had a spirit tree to protect it, which you can see the villagers worshipping. Yeah, I bite the dust. Yes, spoiler. And essentially these villagers bite the dust as well because they're overwhelmed by the curse, by the poverty, by their desperation. And then people like Aldrich sweep in and take advantage, dominate their minds with, suggestions of salvation, when in fact this salvation is far from it. It's just a way for Aldrich to get his next snack. And so with that being said, that was kind of my thoughts on the Undead Village and its kind of fall to ruin. And with that being said, I'm going to move on to some Q&A now. And my first Q&A is from Santiago. And he says, what is your take on Velka? Lots of people think she's this or that. Would love to hear your thoughts. So thanks for this great question, Santiago. Of course, Velka is one of the most talked about characters in lore, and I actually have never done a video and made my stance clear on her, because she's a very mysterious character, and I still think there's a lot to be open to interpretation. But that being said, I'll kind of surmise what my take on her is, that that she's this rogue deity who was a purist, who believed in her mission above everything else. She cared less about being a god more than fulfilling her mission. That's my kind of take on in a nutshell. So, reading a few of her items, I've just got them here on my laptop. Karmic Justice was a miracle in Dark Souls 1. So, one thing you'll discover about Velka, she's not very traditional, in that the gods usually rely on miracles and usually scorn the use of intelligence-based sorceries. Velka's talisman, used to cast miracles, is intelligence-based. But that being said, her miracle, Karmic Justice, is a miracle. So she's got this balance between the new and the old. Here, reading the item description of the Karmic Justice miracle, it states, Miracle of the black-haired witch Velka. For each sin there is a punishment, and it is the task of the goddess Velka to define the sin and mete out the punishment. So, she is the goddess of sin. We see that in Dark Souls 3. There's not much lore on her in Dark Souls 3, but the statue represents her as a goddess of sin. She is named a goddess, but she's also named a witch here. So, I often, in Dark Souls 1 especially, see the kind of item descriptions through the lens of people who support the gods. So she is a goddess, but she's a goddess. Just watching me fly off the cliff here. It's brilliant gameplay. It's just part and parcel of Lazy Sunday lore now. Back to Velka. Yeah, her intelligence is not usual for a god. So what I think about her is that she is a goddess who cares about her mission only. She doesn't care about the dogmatism of the rest of the gods. And if we look at some of her other item descriptions, we kind of get this theme projected as well. So the Vow of Silence miracle states this. Velka, the goddess of sin, is a rogue deity, but she is versed in arts both new and old, and is considered to have a great range of influence, even as gods are concerned. So I think she's a rogue deity because she was a god. I think that she was part of the Pantheon. Not that I believe that the Pantheon are technically gods, I just think that they're powerful beings who have named themselves such, and I believe that Velka was one of them. However, she's called a rogue deity. The reason I think she's a rogue deity is this line here. She is versed in arts both new and old. So instead of just taking the old ways of doing things, i.e. the way that Gwyn and Gwendolyn take the ways of doing, she takes the new ways of doing things, which involves her kind of using any tool at her disposal to complete her mission, which is punishment. And that punishment extends even to the gods. This is why I think she's different from the other gods, is her mission not only concerns humans, which the other gods are they only govern humans, right? They don't really see their, as far as I can tell, ranges of influences kind of lasting over other gods. But Velka is a purist, a fanatic in her ideals. It was her that's to define judgment and punishment and sin, and so she defines it in that anyone can be punished, including the gods. And this is why a lot of her items and a lot of her followers actually end up in the painted world, which is essentially a prison for those things which the gods fear. So this includes the Dark Ember, which is used to make occult weapons which damage the gods. And Velka's items are basically all found within that painting world, as well as the life hunt scythe of Priscilla, of course. Any items that the gods feared end up in this, and this is what makes me think that they fear Velka as well. She is a rogue deity who uses any means necessary, doesn't follow the dogma of the other gods. She just cares about her mission. She will use intelligence and she will use faith to her advantage. That item description, the Vow of Silence, also talks about having a great deal of influence, and she does have a great deal of influence even amongst the gods, it states. And we do see that she has a lot of strong followers, and this includes the Pardoners. So the black set, which is the Pardoner item set from Dark Souls 1, reads as this: the Pardoners listen to the confessions of sinners, urging reflection and salvation. Their masks symbolize separation from worldly desires. The Pardoner's attire is uniformly black in colour, and is said to be imbued with Velka's mystical power. So these Pardoners are as dogmatic in their persecution of Velka's doctrines as she is. They will go to any means necessary to do this, and they carry all manner of items, including purging stones. Again, don't care about holding on to cursed items such as that. They will do anything, and they are devoted to her. They are like her clerics in a lot of ways. And before I carry on, I'm just dropping in here to this little safe room that I've already opened before recording, and you can see the Estus Supus here, and on this table there is where you find the Sunlight Covenant. So in this game we don't have the official Covenant. We have it being worshipped in Lothric by knights, but in this game Sigmire essentially plays the role of the Sunbro. Without the leader to be here anymore, it is essentially just now a covenant for people who like to help others and like to cooperate. And no one else better exemplifies that than Sigmire, so he is certainly a Sunlight Bro. Now, moving on, back to Velka. So her followers are very extreme like her, and very religious in that they follow her above anything else. And the Pardoners are very patronising, very sure of themselves, very sure in their beliefs, because they believe in Velka 100%. And in the painted world we find what could be canon or might not be, another set of followers to her, and that is the Crow People. So the Crow People, in an interview, Miyazaki-san, about the design works, told us that the Crow People are people who have had their bodies warped because of their devotion to Velka. They are so extreme in their beliefs that they actually have had their bodies warped, much like the Pardoners. And this is kind of where the connection to the crows comes from, and why a lot of people think that the crow in the Undead Burg may actually be linked to Velka, and that you have been delivered to mete out justice. And I'm not sure about that. Definitely one that deserves consideration. So her followers are very extreme and strong in their beliefs like her, and to kind of sum up my points on Velka is that she is a goddess who breaks convention of being the other gods. She was initially accepted into Pantheon, and it was for her to determine who sinned, what sin was, and what justice is. The reason I think she was part of the Pantheon is she will work with them, like she uses everything else, when it fits her agenda. So she works with Gwendolyn, of course. And the reason I say of course is because she's the one that essentially indicts people that end up in the Book of the Guilty, who will one day end up being hunted by the blades of the Dark Moon. So she does work with the gods. It's not that she never does work with them. So again, it makes me think she's part of the Pantheon. She's just an extremist within the Pantheon who doesn't care for all the kind of faith aspects of it. All she cares about is her mission. And of course, I'm getting my money taken off me in this room with these two, as usual. Incredible gameplay from lazy Sunday lore. It's just part of the show now. I don't think it's going to change. But anyway, yeah, Velka is just an extremist. She believes in her mission. The gods feared her because I imagine she punished some gods. And it just doesn't... The way she does things doesn't fit into their style. She doesn't go along with the faith over everything. She will use, intelligence-based sorceries. She doesn't care about that. And she just cares about her mission more than anything. And in Dark Souls 3, there isn't a huge amount of lore in her, but she's still known as the goddess of sin. She's a witch because she uses sorceries, but she was the goddess of sin who worked with some gods when it suited her, but ultimately would have dealt out justice to them as well. And so I hope that answers your question in some respects, Santiago. And I'm now going to move on to the next question from my friend Charles, who has got another good question for us this week. And his question is, sorry if this is territory that's already been covered, but I've never gotten a clear picture of how Pontiff Sulyvahn is supposed to fit into the bigger picture of DS3. He's thought to hail from the painted world of Ariandel, but it was my understanding that the painted worlds were places that to escape to, or to be hidden, and did not originate from. So how was he created there? And then he edits saying, I answered this question a couple of hours later, which he's referring to my latest video on Elfrida, where I mentioned that people could be born here. But it is still worth talking about why this lore point exists in the first place. The point of the painted world, as you said, is for people that are lost, forlorn, and we don't belong there because we have a purpose, as everyone repeatedly tells us. And if you've seen my video on Pontiff Sulyvahn, if not, I'd have a look at that. It explains in more detail what I'm going to say now. Pontiff Sulyvahn is one of the most ambitious men in the entire storyline of Dark Souls. If anyone has a clear purpose, it is this man. He, as a young sorcerer, found the profane flame, and instead of being scared of it, he saw what use there could be for it, and he weaponizes it. His witches use it, and he imbues his great blade with it. So we can see that he's a man that takes what he has, and by the time we meet him in Dark Souls 3, he's not only using the profane flame and owning that Irithil, he's in fact taken over the whole township, ousted the last god, which was Gwendolyn, and fed him to the Devourer, and he is in a position of great power. So he is a man who is not lost. He is a man who has a position. And so the point of including his birth in there shows that movement can exist both ways. So people from the outside world who don't have a purpose can move into the world, and I think it's nice that people can live a full life there. They can apparently even raise families or be born there, which is interesting. But that movement could also exist both ways. So Sulyvahn can actually leave because he doesn't fit there. He is not forlorn, and so he comes from the painting. I guess that's the point of making Sulyvahn from there, is that he moves from the painted world to the real world. So I hope that answers your question, Charles. Finally, moving on to the final Q&A question, a really interesting one from John Smith here. And apologies, John, I know this from 2 weeks ago and I'm only getting around to it now, so hopefully this will answer your question. He asks, for your next video, could you ponder on the ending of Dark Souls 2, Scholar of the First Sin, the one where you decide to leave or break the cycle in search of something else? I understand the premise, but it's hard to wrap my head around. Yeah, that's absolutely fine, John, I'm happy to answer this one. So, in my first Lazy Sunday lore, I kind of mentioned that your characters in every Souls, you could create your own character, of course, and you create your own story, but they all have an agency, they all have a reason for doing what they do that kind of unifies them all. So the Ashen one is someone who's lit the fire before and is awoken and now needs to reforge their destiny. Dark Souls 2 is a really personal journey. It's about but understanding the undead curse and breaking that curse. It's more about that than it is about light and the dark, which the other games are about. It's not the grander scheme of things, it's this really philosophical point that Aldia talks about. What is the point in all this? What is the point of the cycles? What is our role in it? And how can we fix it? How can we fix the damage that this cycle is doing to ourselves and our psyche? So you have two choices in Dark Souls 2's ending, and forgive me as I enter this graveyard as you watch my phenomenal dodging. I wasn't playing with sound, so you'll see what happens. So you have two choices. The first choice is the one that came with the game, and that was you go into the throne, you take your throne as the quote-unquote monarch, and you get to decide what happens to the fire. So this ending contains both the possibilities of you linking the fire and the possibility of you letting it fade and becoming the Dark Lord. So it's up to your headcanon at that point. Taking the monarch by the time of Dark Souls 2 is symbolic of you taking command of the fate of the world, is what it means. But the journey of Dark Souls 2 is meant to be one how you beat the curse, and so this ending is essentially a temporary fix, because you will become the monarch. The hollowing will go away for a time, for God knows how long, maybe centuries. So the immediate cure is there, but it's interesting because you've kind of lost your original purpose in a way. You were trying to remember your family or your home, but now you've found your new purpose, which is what keeps you sane, of course, as being a monarch. That being said, you're kind of accepting the cycle. And so option 2, Aldia talks you through both light and dark. And he basically says if you choose light, you're a puppet of the gods, and if you choose dark, you're not maybe making anything better, and someone might just come along and relight the fire anyway. And so the cycle continues if you make those decisions. The whole point of Aldia's research is he was trying to find something out with the cycle, a way you can break it out with of it, so you don't have to make either of those decisions. And so by the time you reach the end of Dark Souls 2, if you choose that ending, you have listened to Aldia's scholarship, a great thinker. I think he's a phenomenal character, as I always say, in that you don't want to be a part of this cycle anymore. You don't want to continue being another name to history. You don't want to just be another Vendrick. In 100 or 1,000 years' time, you will just be that person in the crypt, wandering around in the dark with your followers around you. And so you reject both light and dark, because your character in Dark Souls 2, if you choose that ending, doesn't care about being light or dark, doesn't care about the plight of the gods or the plight of pygmies, just cares about the curse and having to bear the curse. You are the bearer of the curse in Dark Souls 2. The bearer of the curse, that is what matters in Dark Souls 2. And so the second ending, you aren't changing anything. You're still continuing on with that journey that you set out with in the beginning cinematic, that you're trying to answer the question of being cursed, what it means, and how we can escape it. And by walking away, you refuse to continue on the cycles the gods began at the first age. And you are in fact choosing to care about yourself, break the curse. You will break the curse another way. This is a temporary fix, and you see that, and you see that you're just buying in to the endless cycles that have carried on generation upon generation, and that to truly break free, you need to find another way. And I hope that to some degree answers your question, John, because the themes in Dark Souls 2, they share the Dark Souls 1 and 3, of course, about the dark and light, but the focus, especially on the Scholar of the First Sin, isn't on that. It's on you as a personal person, as how you can break your own curse. And you see, by the end of the Scholar of the First Sin, that this isn't the way permanently to fix it. This is just carrying on, and in a way, Aldia, and if you choose that ending, you were right, because look at the settlement, and look at the end of time that's happening now. The worlds are all sucking together because no permanent fix has been found. The hollowing still exists, and if anything, it's worse than ever. So in a lot of ways, that is what the ending means. I hope that answers your question there, John. And so that brings us to the end of this episode, guys. And I apologise that I had to record after playing. The gameplay is still live, and as you can probably tell, my recording is still unscripted. So hopefully we'll be back to the usual format next week. But nonetheless, I still hope you enjoyed the subjects that we covered today. Please hit a like if you enjoyed, and subscribe for more content going forward, and check out my formal lore videos. Thanks guys, and I'll see you next time.